Now recognize Mr. Khanna, who is the chairman of the Subcommittee on the Environment, for 15 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, let me thank the witnesses for appearing today voluntarily. I don't have any interest in being adversarial. I actually want to see if we can get some positive commitments. Let me start out where I think we'll agree. Mr. Woods, what's impressive is that in 1977, Exxon had a report that said, quote, "There is general scientific agreement that the most likely manner in which mankind is influencing the global climate change is through carbon dioxide release from the burning of fossil fuels." Mr. Woods, I assume you'd agree with that Exxon conclusion, yes?
Our work was consistent with what the scientific community was saying at the time, yes.
And in your role as CEO, as you told Representative Comer, you would never today endorse statements that blatantly contradict climate science, correct?
Correct.
And so if an organization, for example, today were to say they do not believe in the linkage between fossil fuels and warming, I assume you would say that's false, correct?
I wouldn't support that statement.
You would say it's false?
In looking at the full context of the statement, I'd make a judgment on that, but that's...
I mean, you would say it's false that there's no linkage between fossil fuels and warming, correct? I mean...
The combustion of fossil fuels leads to emissions, which is linked to climate change, yes.
Okay. And I assume you know that your former Exxon CEO, Lee Raymond, made exactly that statement in 2002, nearly 25 years after Exxon's report. He said, quote, he does not believe, quote, that the science establishes the linkage between fossil fuels and warming. Now, I'm glad you admitted that that statement is false, and I really don't want to dwell on the past. But in the spirit of giving you the chance to turn the page for the company, I assume you would acknowledge that Mr. Raymond's statement was a mistake and the company regrets it, correct?
I think Mr. Raymond's statement was consistent with the science at the time.
I don't even want to argue that, Mr. Woods. I don't even want to argue that. We could go back and forth. You said it's a false statement. You know, when I make a statement that's wrong, when most people make a statement that's wrong, they say, okay, it's a mistake, we regret it. I'm just asking you for that. I assume now that it's a false statement that the company regrets making it and would acknowledge that, right?
I think the expectation would be that we'd look at that at the time it was said, and years ago that was.
But forget whether it was consistent or not. Can you just acknowledge that it was a mistake to make? If someone makes a mistake, just say it was a mistake, and you regret that that statement was out there. Would you say that?
I don't think it's fair to judge something 25 years ago with what we've learned since that
well,
time.
I'm disappointed that you're not even willing to say that something is a mistake. Doesn't inspire a lot of confidence about, you know, introspection and going forward. I'm surprised, actually. I thought you would just say it's a mistake. It's not asking you much to say, hey, it's a mistake that someone's put that out. Anyway, let me move on. The United Nations 2021 Production Gap Report says, to be consistent with a 1.5-degree pathway, oil and gas production would have to decline annually by 4% and 3% respectively. The IEA's 2021 net zero roadmap calls for no new oil and gas developments. Mr. Lawler, BP has said that it supports economy-wide net zero greenhouse gas emission targets by 2050. You made a strong commitment, actually, to reduce oil and gas production by 40% by 2030. I assume you're doing this because you think it is important and part of the solution to the climate crisis. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Khanna. What BP has aligned its strategy on is in accordance with the Paris Agreement. We have a new strategy. Just 2 years ago, just before COVID started, we put this new strategy into place.
Right. I don't want to cut you off. We have limited time. And so you believe that the oil and gas production must decline each year? Is that partly why you're doing this?
We think that's the best decision for BP, and that's our
contribution. And Ms. Watkins, Shell's energy transition strategy says we have set our net zero target, so it's fully consistent with this Paris Agreement. And you today actually announced this new thing where you're going to be having a 50% reduction on Scope 1 and 2, and you are also committed to a 1 to 2% year in total oil production decline. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Great, and I assume you're doing that because you also believe under the Paris agreements that it's important and that we need to have oil and gas production declining every year?
Congressman, what we do believe is that hydrocarbon demand needs to reduce if we're going to get to net zero by 2050, which is why we're also providing more and more low and no carbon
Right, but
energy
you're committed to this 1 to 2% reduction every year, right? I mean, that's your policy, correct?
It is, and
let me just turn down to Mr. Worth. Chevron announced, unlike BP and Shell, that earlier this year that you plan to increase by 3.5% on a compound basis your production. Is that correct, Mr. Worth?
Congressman, our forward guidance would show that we will grow lower carbon production of traditional.
I'm just asking, are you going to be increasing your oil and gas production by 3.5% on an annual basis?
Chairman, we will increase our oil and gas production and reduce the carbon.
Okay, so you're going to be increasing the production. And Mr. Woods, you have said that you want to keep the oil and gas production flat. Is that correct? Or the
We're focused on meeting the needs of society and whatever that needs.
I don't need the American apple pie speech. It's a factual question. You're going to keep it flat, right? So I'm just getting it. So 40% reduction BP, 1 to 2% annual Shell, the Europeans, the American companies, Chevron's increasing, Exxon is increasing. Mr. Lawler, BP has said it supports...
Will the gentleman yield for question?
No, not right now. Mr. BP has said that it supports economy-wide net zero greenhouse gas emissions. BP, clearly you're only one member, so I assume when you're saying economy-wide, you believe other companies need to follow your lead in decreasing production. Would that be fair, Mr. Lawler?
Who's going next for us? Are you going next?
Yes, sir. I think we had offered up as just a suggestion. You know, there's many approaches to net zero, and we certainly wouldn't.
But you would believe that other companies, I guess my question is this, Mr. Lawler, do you believe that the science says that other companies should go down every year?
Well, I think what we would agree with is the IPCC report, the scientific consensus that action needs to be taken to lower emissions is real, it's significant, and BP is in action on that.
Let me just ask a yes or no question on this, Mr. Worth. Are you embarrassed as an American company that your production is going up while the European counterparts are going down?
Congressman, as we have already heard, demand for energy is going up in the world.
Okay, so you're not embarrassed. And do you commit to do anything? I'm just asking an open question. It's not a gotcha question. Do you commit to do anything to matching your European counterparts to try to bring the actual demand of oil production down?
Congressman, with all due respect, I'm very proud of our company and what we do. I'm proud of the companies in this
So
industry.
no, you won't reduce
the solution.
You won't. And Mr. Woods, would you commit to matching your European counterparts to reducing the production of oil like both Shell and BP are doing?
We're committing to lowering our emissions.
No, are you committed to lowering the production as Paris Accords say, or no? It's
the issue, Mr. Chairman.
It's a yes or no. You could say, you could explain why you're not, but are you committing? Could you commit to lowering production or not?
We're going to lower emissions, which is the source
I'll
of
take
the
that
issue
as a
that
no.
we're trying to address.
Let me move to a new point. Ms. Watkins, you know, so far you seem like the star here. I mean, do you agree that that the electric vehicles are vital to decarbonization? I assume you do, because you said the rise of electric vehicles is vital to decarbonizing road transport.
Yes, we believe that to be
Great.
the case.
Mr. Lawler, I assume you agree with this, because you say energy use in road transport is key. It needs to be dominated by electrification.
Yes, sir. We believe that EVs are significant.
Yes, both of your companies, along with Exxon and Shell, support the American Petroleum Institute. And Mr. Summers, you're here. You're the head of API, and you said, quote, the government efforts to promote electric vehicles would leave everyday drivers high and dry, unfairly burden non-EV drivers, and be costly for taxpayers and consumers. In fact, you've been participating in, quote, state-by-state multi-million-dollar battles to squelch utilities' plans to build charging stations across the country. Ms. Watkins, on this panel with you is Mr. Summers, the head of API. Will you take the opportunity today to tell him that his opposition to electric vehicles is wrong, and that instead of opposing tax credits for electric vehicles, he should support them?
Chairman Khanna, we're a member of the API for a number of reasons.
I know, and I respect that. Can you just tell him to stop the electric vehicle advertising? If you say that today, he'll stop. You give him $10 million a year.
We have a number of conversations, of course, ongoing conversations.
Could you just tell him that today? Just tell him, please stop the electric vehicle advertising. It'll help us in Congress. Just tell him to stop.
So I'd like to speak on behalf of Shell. And here at Shell, we very much believe electric vehicles are part of the future, which is why we.
If you would tell him to stop, it would be really helpful. The other, help the president. He's really trying to do what you're asking the president to do. The other thing is, I saw your positive statement today. I was really happy. You said you're for a well-crafted methane fee. You know who's been advertising against the methane fee? API. API, $500,000 in the last 3 months on Facebook advertising alone against the president's agenda on the methane fee that you supported this morning in your great statement. You added it. Your staff crafted a statement and you said, no, we want to have well-crafted methane. Can you please tell API to stop the advertising on the methane fee, against the methane fee?
There are several places where we are not fully aligned with the API. We've been
Please just tell them to stop. Mr. Lawler, anyone, will you tell them to stop? Mr. Lawler, will you tell them to stop the advertising?
Yeah, Mr. Khanna, we've been in active communications with API now from the time I joined. And
he's sitting right next to you on the virtual screen. Just say stop. Just speaks plainly. Say stop the advertising against electric vehicles. Stop the advertising against methane.
Well, I speak for BP, Mr. Khanna, and we've been supportive of the green climate portions of
Let me ask you this. I assume, Mr. Woods, Mr. Wirth, this is your chance to redeem yourself. Will you tell them to stop API if you're not doing the production stuff? Can you tell API to stop that advertising, either of you?
Chairman Khanna, we engage in discussions on many policy issues at API. There's a diverse set of members. As Mr. Summers said, over 600 members in this association.
You won't tell them to stop?
The members don't always agree on everything.
Let me ask you this. Total, as you know, they pulled their commitment to API because they said they can't be part of an organization that is engaged against the fight for climate change. Will each of you commit to leaving API if they continue to lobby against electric vehicles? Will any of you commit to leaving them if they're lobbying against electric vehicles? You know what? Here's what's so frustrating, because I really don't think you're as bad as the CEOs of the past. I don't. I think you have tough jobs. You got there. You got a horrible record on stuff. You're figuring out how you don't get into litigation trouble while really trying to tell the truth. It's a tough act. I mean, I don't envy you. And I don't believe you purposely want to be out there spreading climate disinformation. But you're funding these groups, and they're really having an impact. They're spending millions of dollars in Congress to kill electric vehicles, and they're spending millions of dollars against the methane gas. And you could do something here. You could tell them to knock it off for the sake of the planet. You could end it. You could end that lobbying. Would any of you take the opportunity and look at API and say, stop it? Any of you? Will you commit to, could you commit, any of you? Ms. Watkins, come on. I mean, will you do something here? Would you commit to saying you're not going to fund any group that's going to engage in climate disinformation at least?
Chairman Khanna, what I'll commit to is continuing to be an active member of the API. And we discussed many issues in the API, some of which have to do with climate policy. And I'm really pleased that we've...
Let me ask this. Would any of you commit to having an independent audit to verify that you're not funding, that none of your funds are going for climate denial? Okay, let me ask this. All of you, raise your hand if you think the climate crisis is one of the most important crises that humanity faces. Just raise your hand. I think all of you do. It's important? Yes, it's right. And, I understand you fund things for a lot of reasons. You're the CEOs. You can't track all the details. But if your money is going to organizations that are against the fundamental values that you claim you stand for, don't you think you have some obligation to monitor where the money is going and to make some commitment today to the American people? Right now, your position to the American people, this is not gotcha. This is like actually trying to understand where you said. You're saying we're just going to spend, we'll have conversation. If they want to do false advertising, fine. We'll talk to them behind the scenes. Are any of you today prepared to make any statement saying we're going to take accountability on something so important and stop funding groups that are actively engaged in any form of climate disinformation? I'll give all of you the last word, so my time is up. any form of commitment in any way, even with a bunch of weasel words, would be great. Please go. Everyone will have a chance to answer.
Chairman Khanna, I'll start by saying that we have been issuing for the last several years trade association reports where we very clearly lay out with a great deal of transparency where we are aligned and where we are somewhat misaligned with trade associations. In fact, we left a trade association because we were so misaligned that we didn't see a way of getting back in alignment. We've been transparent about that, and I will commit to you today that we will continue to drive increased scrutiny on a number of areas around climate policy in that arena.
Mr. Lawler?
Yes, sir. So BP has 7,000 ChargeMaster stations in the UK on their way to 70,000 charging stations by the end of the decade. We're very much for EV use. We advocate that with an API and other organizations, and we'll continue to do that, sir.
Mr. Worth?
Madam Chair's time's
I just, if they can ask, if the two, Mr. Worth and Mr. Woods, could just answer, and I'm not going to ask anything more. They went over a couple minutes.
Okay.
Mr. Worth or Mr. Woods, do you have anything?
Chairman Khanna,
Very quickly.
We engage with a number of organizations, and we don't control and may not always agree with the positions taken or statements made by industry groups and other organizations. We engage in constructive dialogue. What I can tell you is that our position is that climate change is real, the use of fossil fuels contributes to it, and we're committed to helping advance a lower carbon future.
We make our positions very clear going into the trade associations, and then we work with them to try to advance those positions consistent with the broader view of the membership that each of the organizations serves. And I would point out the API has evolved the climate position and supports carbon tax along with a number of other constructive climate policies.
Okay. You back.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields